Millionaire Mafia boss catches Nanny protecting his secret daughter, and he can't believe his eyes. The rules of Victor Romano's world had never changed. No exceptions, no explanations, and absolutely no interruptions. When Victor stepped into the private room buried deep beneath the basement of an upscale cigar lounge in Manhattan, all sound seemed to vanish instantly. The men seated around the table, representatives of the most powerful crime families on the East Coast, understood this well. A single frown from Victor was enough to plunge an entire city into silence. Tonight's meeting was a matter of life and death. A fragile ceasefire was being negotiated. Dim golden light spilled across the cold metal table, reflecting off untouched glasses of whiskey. Victor took the central seat, his posture straight, his eyes the gray of a brewing storm. He didn't need to speak much. One short sentence was enough to establish absolute authority. Then, the one thing that was never allowed to happen, happened. The phone in Victor's inner jacket pocket vibrated. Victor lifted it to his ear, his voice low and sharp as steel. "Speak." On the other end came ragged, panicked breathing, trembling so badly it was almost unintelligible. Mr. Romano, and please come home immediately." It was the voice of Sophie Carter, the young nanny, breaking under fear. "If you don't come back, Elena will die." Victor's eyes darkened, the cold in them so severe that the men across the table instinctively leaned back. "The meeting is over," Victor said, his voice calm but carrying a pressure heavy enough to crush anyone in the room. A member objected. "Victor, this—" The gunshot cut him off. The bullet slammed into the liquor bottle right beside the speaker's hand. "No one speaks further," Victor said coldly. He walked straight out to the underground parking garage. 12 minutes later, the sky over New York was torn apart by steel rotors. Victor stood inside the cabin, the city drifting beneath his feet like a sea of lifeless lights. He had killed. He had given orders. He had turned himself into part of the darkness. But Elena did not belong to that darkness. She was the only light still left within him. The Romano estate in the Hamptons looked more like a peaceful palace than the stronghold of a criminal empire. High stone walls, electric fences, multi-layered security systems, everything was designed to keep enemies out. But no one knew that what Victor Romano protected most fiercely was hidden deep inside. At the end of the East Wing corridor, behind a door that was always locked, existed another world, a room filled with soft, gentle light, pastel-colored walls, low bookshelves within a child's reach, toys scattered across the floor, a teddy bear with worn ears lying beside a small drawing table covered in crayons. No guns, no violence, only the innocent laughter and steady breathing of a child asleep for her afternoon nap. Elena Romano, 4 years old, Victor's biological daughter. No one in the underworld knew she existed. No records, no photographs. Victor erased every trace the moment Elena was born. Her mother, a woman completely outside the mafia world, died during childbirth, leaving Victor to face something he had never prepared for in his entire life: being a father. He chose the only way he knew: hide her. Hide Elena from his enemies. Hide her from blood-soaked deals. And, to some extent, hide her from himself. Victor didn't know how to hold a child. He didn't know how to tell bedtime stories. He didn't know how to become the father Elena deserved. But he knew one thing: if his world ever reached her, it would crush her without mercy. So Victor hired Sophie Carter. Sophie didn't belong to this world. She was a woman in her early 20s, slender, from an ordinary background. She had once studied early childhood education but dropped out due to family circumstances. The job as a nanny at the Romano estate was a stroke of luck and a dangerous secret. She was not allowed to ask questions, not allowed to tell anyone. And under no circumstances was she allowed to leave the East Wing with Elena. Over the past 6 months, Sophie had become the child's entire world. She brushed Elena's hair every morning, patiently untangling every knot. She read bedtime stories every night, even though Elena always made her read the same book again and again. When Elena cried because she missed her mother, a woman she had never seen, Sophie was the one who held her close, whispering that everything would be okay. Gradually, Elena stopped asking, "Where's Daddy?" Because in her small, fragile world, Sophie was the safest place there was. Victor watched it all from a distance. He rarely stepped into that room, not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid. Afraid that if he stayed in that space too long, the wall of ice around his heart would finally collapse. But tonight, that wall had begun to crack. Sophie's call was not just a plea for help. It was a signal that Victor's greatest secret was under threat, that the world he had tried so desperately to keep at bay was finding a way in. And what terrified Victor most was not the possibility of Elena being discovered. It was Sophie's final sentence, whispered in panic. "If you don't come back, she will die." Time rewinds 5 hours earlier. The heavy iron gate of the Romano estate swung open slowly, releasing a dry, echoing sound into the quiet afternoon. A sleek black sports car rolled over the gravel driveway and came to a stop right before the main steps. Camilla DeLuca stepped out of the car as if the place already belonged to her. She wore a tight red dress, its cut so perfect it bordered on provocative, and her high heels struck the marble floor with a cold, deliberate rhythm. Camilla was beautiful in a way that made people wary. Sharp, arrogant beauty, carrying the scent of danger like a rose with poisoned thorns. Sophie, standing in the hallway, froze. Her heart skipped a beat. Camilla was not supposed to be here. The engagement ceremony had not even taken place yet. Victor had made himself perfectly clear. No one was allowed into the estate when he was away, especially not the East Wing. "Good afternoon," Camilla said, her voice sweet as honey, while her eyes remained icy. "Is Victor at home?" Ms. DeLuca," Sophie bowed instinctively. "Mr. Romano is busy with work in the city." Camilla smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. "Then that's even better." Her gaze swept across the grand hall, as if assessing every piece of furniture, every corner, everything she already considered her future property. When Camilla's eyes stopped at the end of the East Wing corridor, Sophie felt her throat go dry. That door, always locked, always guarded, always forbidden. "That door over there," Camilla said, slowly walking toward it. "Why is it always closed?" Sophie swallowed hard. "It's just an old storage room, ma'am." Camilla let out a soft laugh. "You're a terrible liar." She turned back, her sharp gaze cutting across Sophie's paling face like a blade. Then Camilla clapped her hands once, crisp and decisive. "Bruno." From the shadows near the staircase, Bruno, the head of security, stepped forward. He was the man who had always made Sophie feel safe. But today, his eyes avoided hers, stiff and strangely uneasy. "Open it," Camilla ordered. Sophie panicked. "No, Mr. Romano has—" A slap rang out, sharp and clean. Sophie staggered, a metallic taste spreading across her tongue. Camilla stood close, her voice lowered but dripping with venom. "Never use Victor's name to block my path. I am the woman who will become Mrs. Romano." Bruno hesitated for only a second. Then he pulled out the key. As the lock turned, Sophie felt her entire world collapse. A dark premonition crushed her chest, stealing her breath. The door opened, not to a storage room, but to a child's bedroom. Crayon drawings covered the walls. Stuffed animals lay scattered around. And in the center of the room, Elena. The little girl looked up, wide-eyed and confused at the sight of a stranger. "Sophie?" she called softly. Camilla froze for a single heartbeat, then her face twisted, not in shock, not in confusion, but in pure, naked and unhinged jealousy. "So this is it," Camilla whispered, her voice trembling with fury. Victor's secret. The air in the room seemed to freeze the instant Camilla DeLuca laid eyes on the child. Elena was still far too young to understand what was happening. She only sensed the sudden shift in the room that had always been her safe place. Her tiny hands tightened around her old teddy bear, her wide, confused eyes moving from Sophie to the woman in the red dress standing rigidly before her. "Who are you?" Elena asked softly, her voice trembling. The question poured fuel onto the fire burning in Camilla's eyes. She laughed, a sharp, high laugh that rang harshly through the pastel-colored children's room. There was no warmth in it, only mockery and a surge of uncontrollable jealousy. "Victor hid you well," Camilla said, each word released slowly. "Hiding an entire child behind my back." Instinctively, Sophie stepped in front of Elena, spreading her arms wide. "Ms. DeLuca, please, I beg you, the child has nothing to do with whatever is between you and Mr. Romano." Camilla tilted her head, her gaze sliding from Sophie's pale face down to her trembling hands. "Who do you think you are, speaking to me like that?" She stepped forward, yanked Sophie hard by the arm, and shoved her aside. Sophie fell to the floor, her back slamming into the bookshelf, the air knocked painfully from her lungs. "Elena!" Sophie screamed. Camilla had already seized the child's arm. Elena shrieked, her fragile cries echoing through the room like a knife driven straight into Sophie's heart. The little girl struggled, her small legs kicking wildly in the air. "Let her go!" Sophie scrambled to her feet and lunged forward. Camilla spun around, her eyes wild. She swung her hand and slapped Sophie across the face again. This time, Sophie felt her cheek burn, her ears ringing. "Shut up!" Camilla screamed. "You're nothing but a servant, a paid babysitter whose job is to keep her mouth shut." Her gaze swept the room, stopping at the craft table littered with scissors, crayons, and scattered paper. Camilla reached out and grabbed a long, sharp pair of scissors, the metal flashing under the light. Sophie went numb. "You're insane," Sophie whispered. "Please, you can't—" "Can't what?" Camilla sneered, raising the scissors to Elena's eye level. "Erase a mistake?" Elena sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "Sophie, I'm scared." Those words shattered Sophie. She charged forward without hesitation. Camilla screamed and stumbled back, the scissors slashing wildly through the air. A cold line tore across Sophie's arm. Blood immediately soaked into the sleeve of her white blouse. Sophie cried out in pain, but still positioned herself in front of Elena, hunching her back, arms spread wide like a fragile human shield. "If you touch her, you'll have to kill me first." Camilla froze for a single second. Then her smile twisted into something grotesque. "Fine." She turned toward the door, her voice icy. "Bruno." Bruno appeared in the doorway, his face tense. "What do you need, Ms. Camilla?" "Lock that one away," Camilla pointed at Sophie. "I need to speak privately with the child." "No!" Sophie screamed, struggling as Bruno grabbed her with brutal force. "Please, please, you know Mr. Romano will kill you if—" "Shut up," Bruno growled, avoiding her eyes. "I'm just following orders." He dragged Sophie out of the room, threw her into a dark storage room at the end of the hallway, and locked the door from the outside. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed Sophie whole. She pounded on the door, screaming until her voice broke. "Elena! Elena!" From far away came the sound of a child crying, and then silence. Sophie slid down to the floor, her breathing ragged, her heart pounding out of control. Blood dripped from her arm onto the cold ground. In that moment of despair, Sophie understood she had no time left. If she didn't get out, Elena would die. And hundreds of kilometers away, Victor Romano was racing home, unaware that with every passing second, his daughter was being pulled closer to the blade. From the far end of the hallway, through the thick walls, Sophie heard muffled sounds, objects being knocked over, hurried footsteps, and then a short, sharp scream of pain. Not the whining cry of a child, but the scream of real fear. Sophie's entire body froze for a single second. Then something inside her shattered. She was no longer a nanny, no longer the gentle girl who always bowed her head before powerful people. In that moment, Sophie was the only person left who could protect Elena. "No," she whispered, then screamed in desperation. "No." Sophie sprang to her feet and threw her whole body against the door. Her shoulder slammed into the wood, pain exploding like fire. The door didn't budge. She did it again, and again, and again. "Open the door!" Sophie screamed, her throat tearing raw. "Please!" No answer. A choked sob echoed from the children's room, driving Sophie nearly mad. She spun around the cramped storage room, her panicked eyes scanning the shelves, the mop, the bucket. Then she saw it, a heavy metal container filled with floor-cleaning chemicals. Sophie didn't think. She grabbed the handle and swung it with all her strength straight at the lock. A loud clang rang out, metal denting, but the lock held firm. Elena's cries rang out again, closer, more frantic. "I'm here," Sophie sobbed. "I'm coming." She staggered back a few steps, took a deep breath, then hurled herself forward, throwing her full body weight into the door. The first time, her shoulder hurt so badly her vision darkened. The second time, her ribs flared with sharp pain. The third time, there was a cracking sound. The wood split. Sophie screamed, pouring every last ounce of strength she had into it. The door burst open. She stumbled into the hallway, rolling across the carpet, her head spinning. But Sophie didn't stop. Gritting her teeth through the pain, she pushed herself up and ran toward the east wing, the children's room. The sight before her made Sophie's heart stop. Elena was curled up beneath the overturned craft table, clutching her teddy bear, her face deathly pale, her entire body trembling uncontrollably. Above her, Camilla paced in circles like a hunting animal, the scissors gleaming in her hand. "Come out now," Camilla said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I just want to cut your hair." "Elena!" Sophie screamed. Camilla spun around, eyes wide with shock. How did you get out?" Sophie didn't answer. She scanned the room and spotted a large brass lamp lying on the floor. Without thinking, she rushed forward and grabbed it, her hands shaking, but her gaze had never been more resolute. "Stay away from her," Sophie said, her voice hoarse but firm. "Right now." Camilla laughed. "Look at you. Bloody? Shaking? You think you're a hero?" She turned her back on Sophie and bent down, yanking Elena's leg out from her hiding place. Elena screamed, the sound tearing through the air. Sophie roared. She charged. The brass lamp swung with every last bit of strength left in her body. It slammed into Camilla's shoulder with a heavy thud. Camilla shrieked in pain, the scissors flying from her hand and skidding across the floor. Sophie didn't give her a chance. She lunged forward, dove beneath the table, and wrapped Elena tightly in her arms. The child sobbed uncontrollably, burying her face in Sophie's neck. "It's okay now," Sophie whispered, tears mixing with blood. "I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you." But Camilla wasn't finished. She scrambled back to her feet and picked up the scissors again, her eyes blazing with hatred. Sophie saw the metal flash and understood. She couldn't run. She had only one choice left. Sophie turned, clutching Elena tightly, her back facing Camilla, using her own body as a shield. She closed her eyes, waiting for the pain. A deafening gunshot tore through the room. Sophie flinched, her heart nearly shattering. But no pain came, only the sound of metal hitting the floor and a deep voice, cold enough to freeze the air. "Drop the weapon." A thin haze of gun smoke hung in the air. Sophie opened her eyes very slowly. She was still alive. Elena was still in her arms, trembling but unharmed. The child clung tightly to Sophie's neck, as if letting go would cause the entire world to collapse. The scissors lay on the floor, sliding to a stop beside the overturned craft table. At the doorway of the children's room stood Victor Romano. The hallway light cast over his tall frame, turning him into a dense, looming shadow that radiated such crushing pressure the room itself seemed to shrink. The gun in his hand was still smoking, the barrel pointed toward the floor. The shot had been deliberately fired to hit no one. Camilla spun around. "Victor!" she gasped, her face pale. "You're finally back. You have no idea what just happened. This child—" "Shut up!" Victor's voice wasn't loud, but it was cold enough to freeze Camilla in place. He stepped into the room, his movements slow and deliberate. Every step felt like it slammed directly into the nerves of everyone present. Victor didn't look at Camilla. His gaze settled on Sophie. Her arm was soaked in blood, her face was drained of color, yet her arms were still wrapped tightly around Elena, shielding her. Camilla swallowed, her hands trembling. "You have to listen to my explanation. I walked into this room and saw—" "You were holding scissors," Victor cut in, his voice dropping like distant thunder. "And you touched my daughter." The air went completely still. Camilla's eyes widened. "Your daughter?" Victor took another step forward. His gray eyes were sharp as blades. "Yes, my daughter, Elena Romano." Sophie felt Elena shift slightly in her arms as she heard her name spoken aloud for the first time. Camilla shook her head wildly. "No, that's impossible. You never told me. You lied to me." "No," Victor replied evenly. "I protected my child." He knelt down on one knee in front of Sophie and Elena. The sight stunned both Camilla and Bruno, hovering at the doorway. A mafia boss, kneeling before a blood-stained nanny. Victor looked at Sophie carefully for the first time. At the deep gash on her arm, at the bruise on her cheek, at the way Elena buried her face in Sophie's neck, not his. "Did she hurt you?" Victor asked softly, lowering his voice so only Elena could hear. Elena shook her head, tears falling silently. "Sophie protected me." Victor closed his eyes for a single heartbeat. Then he stood. When Victor turned toward Camilla, what remained in his eyes was not explosive anger, but judgment. "Bruno," Victor said. Bruno flinched as he stepped forward, sweat beading on his forehead. "Yes, sir." "How did she get in here?" Bruno said nothing. Victor didn't need the answer. He strode forward, grabbed Bruno by the collar, and slammed him hard against the wall. A heavy crash echoed through the room. Bruno collapsed, coughing violently. "You betrayed me," Victor said quietly, so only Bruno could hear. "And you betrayed my daughter." Victor released him as if discarding something filthy. He turned to Camilla. "The engagement is over. The alliance with the DeLuca family ends here." Camilla screamed, her voice breaking apart. "You can't do this. My father will—" Victor stepped in close, his gaze locking onto hers. "If your father sets one foot on this land, I will send you back to him, piece by piece." He turned away. "Take her to the basement. Tie her up. If she resists, break her arm." Camilla's screams echoed as she was dragged away, her threats dissolving into the long hallway. The children's room fell into a terrifying silence. Victor turned back to Sophie. She was shaking from pain and exhaustion. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low, carrying, for the first time, something like emotion. "I'm here." The roar of engines tore through the quiet night of the Hamptons. Only minutes after Camilla was dragged down to the basement, the entire Romano estate plunged into darkness. The garden lights went out. The exterior gate lighting shut down abruptly. A move far too familiar. Someone was deliberately blinding the fortress. Victor stood in the second-floor hallway, listening, not with his ears, but with instincts forged through decades of violence. "Marco," he said briefly into the radio, "we've got a situation." "I see it, boss," Marco replied, his voice tight. "Main gate signal is down. Perimeter cameras are cut." Victor looked at Sophie. She was sitting against the wall, her arm crudely wrapped with a towel, Elena still in her arms. Sophie's face was deathly pale, but her eyes never left the child. "Listen to me," Victor said, kneeling in front of Sophie again, his voice urgent but steady. "People are coming. They're not here to talk." Sophie swallowed hard. "Is it her father?" Victor nodded. "Anthony DeLuca." The name alone made the air grow heavy. One of the oldest and most ruthless bosses on the East Coast. Camilla wasn't just his daughter. She was a political asset. Victor stood. "We move. Now." An explosion thundered from afar. Boom! The entire mansion shook. A large window on the lower floor shattered, glass raining down in a violent cascade. Immediately after came the relentless burst of automatic gunfire. "They're attacking!" Marco shouted through the radio. Victor didn't hesitate. "Get them to the library," he ordered. "Activate Black Protocol." Marco paused for a beat. "Copy." Victor bent down and took Elena from Sophie's arms into his own. The child clung tightly to his neck, trembling with fear. Victor placed a hand on her back and whispered, "It's okay. Dad's here." Then he turned to Sophie. "Follow me?" They ran. The long hallway trembled with gunfire erupting from below. The smell of gunpowder began to creep up the staircase. A stray bullet punched through a side window and buried itself in the wall, just centimeters from Sophie. She screamed and dropped instinctively. Victor immediately stepped in front of her, his body becoming a living shield. "Get up," he barked. "Don't stop." They burst into the library, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Victor went straight to a large antique globe in the corner. He rotated it in a precise sequence. Click, hiss, thud. Part of the bookshelf slid aside, revealing a thick steel door. The safe room. Victor opened it and pushed Elena and Sophie inside. Marco appeared behind him, covered in dust and blood. "What's it like out there?" Victor asked. "There are many of them," Marco replied quickly. "At least 3 SUVs, heavy weapons." Victor nodded. He turned to Sophie, opened a small drawer inside the safe room, and took out a handgun. Sophie stared at the weapon, stunned. I don't know how to use it." Victor placed the gun in her hand, closing her fingers firmly around the grip. "Hopefully you won't have to. But if they break through this door—" He looked straight into her eyes. "Don't let them touch Elena." Sophie went pale. Then she nodded, firmly. "I promise?" Victor held her gaze for another second, a deep, heavy look, carrying something that had never existed before. Then he stepped back. "Lock the door," he said. "No matter what you hear, don't open it." "Victor," Sophie called after him, her voice shaking. "Will you come back?" Victor didn't answer right away. The gunfire outside grew even more violent. Finally, he said only, "Protect the child." The steel door slammed shut. Outside, Victor Romano turned and took a rifle from Marco's hands. His face no longer held any trace of the softness of the father from moments before. Only the warlord remained. "Hold the stairs," Victor ordered, chambering around. "Don't let them reach the second floor." Under flickering lights and bullets ripping through the air, the Romano estate was no longer a home. It became a battlefield. And Victor knew. Tonight only one family would be allowed to leave this place alive. The gunfire gradually faded. Gunsmoke lingered in the shattered grand hall of the Romano estate, mixing with the smell of burned wood and hot metal. The broken remains of chandeliers hung loosely from the ceiling, their flickering light pulsing like the dying heartbeat of a battlefield just torn apart. Victor Romano stood at the center of the grand staircase, the rifle in his hands fitted with its final magazine. His white shirt was soaked with blood and dust, his face darkened by smoke, yet his eyes remained terrifyingly sharp. "Boss," Marco called out from behind a chipped marble pillar. "They've stopped firing." Victor didn't answer right away. He heard slow footsteps coming from the direction of the main gate, not hurried, not panicked. The confident rhythm of someone who believed he still held control. Anthony DeLuca appeared. He was older than Victor had expected, his back slightly bent, one hand resting on a silver cane. But his eyes were still sharp, like an old blade that had never truly dulled. 4 bodyguards followed behind him, hesitating, their guns lowered but not released. "Victor," Anthony said in a raspy voice that echoed through the ruined hall. "You've gone too far." Victor descended the stairs one step at a time, calm and measured, as if bodies were not scattered all around them. "You sent men to attack my home," he said. "And you call that too far?" Anthony curled his lip. "You took my daughter, broke the engagement, humiliated the DeLuca family. Did you think I would sit still?" Victor stopped, only a few steps away from him. "Your daughter held scissors and tried to kill my child." The words fell like a hammer blow. Anthony froze for the briefest moment, just long enough for Victor to notice. He hadn't known. "My child?" Anthony frowned. "What are you talking about?" Victor tilted his head, his voice dropping. "Camilla discovered my daughter, and she tried to erase her." The air thickened. Anthony looked at Victor, then around at the scene, the bullet holes, his own men now surrounded from every direction. For the first time, the calculation in his eyes faltered. "You can't kill me," Anthony said slowly. "The Commission won't allow it. A full-scale war would erupt." Victor smiled, a cold smile, devoid of any warmth. "You already started it." He raised his hand. Instantly, from the shadows of hallways and balconies, Romano's men emerged, red laser sights locking onto the chests of the DeLuca bodyguards, completely surrounded. "The game is over," Victor said. "You take your men and leave. Camilla will be returned tomorrow morning. Alive." Anthony tightened his grip on the cane. "And the price?" Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice so only the two of them could hear. "If a single member of the DeLuca family ever sets foot in my territory again, I will erase your name from the map." Anthony held Victor's gaze for a long moment, then he turned away. "Withdraw," Anthony ordered his guards. Heavy footsteps left the estate. Engines roared in the distance, fading away, leaving behind a crushing silence after the storm. Marco exhaled. "They're gone, boss." Victor didn't reply. He stood still for a moment, as if the last of his strength had finally drained from his body. The war was over, but the most important thing was still waiting for him behind the steel door. The steel door of the safe room turned open with the heavy grind of gears. The sound echoed through the stillness like a signal that the nightmare had finally come to an end. Sophie sprang to her feet at once. Her arms were still wrapped tightly around Elena, who had fallen asleep in her embrace at some point. The handgun slipped from Sophie's hand and clattered onto the floor, but she didn't notice. Her eyes were fixed only on the figure standing in the doorway. Victor Romano. He looked worse than the last time Sophie had seen him. A long gash ran across his forehead, dried blood at his temple. His shirt was torn, smeared with dust, and scorched by bullet marks. But he was standing there, alive. "Sophie," Victor said, his voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. She couldn't hold back anymore. Sophie rushed toward him, nearly collapsing into his arms. She buried her face against his chest, sobbing as all the fear she had held inside finally broke free. "You came back," she choked. "I thought you—" "No," Victor whispered, his arms tightening around her and Elena. "I told you I would come back." Elena stirred awake. "Daddy?" Victor bent down and lifted her up, ignoring the pain shooting through his back. He held his daughter tightly against his chest for the first time without avoidance, without fear. "I'm here," he said softly. "It's all over now." They left the safe room as dawn broke through the shattered windows. The mansion lay in ruins, but the early sunlight bathed everything in a gentle golden glow, as if the world were giving them a chance to begin again. Victor stopped in the library. "You're fired?" he said suddenly. Sophie froze. "What?" Victor turned to look at her, his expression serious but no longer cold. "I can't have a nanny who disobeys orders, assaults guests, and points a gun at my enemies." Sophie's heart sank. Then Victor stepped forward and took her hand. "I don't need an employee." He looked straight into her eyes. "I need someone who stays. With me? With Elena?" Elena looked up, beaming. "I like Sophie. She makes the best cakes." Victor laughed, a real laugh, rare and genuine. "Then it's settled." Sophie looked at the man who had been willing to burn the world for his child, looked at the little girl gripping her hand, and understood that the most dangerous place could also be the safest, if love lived there. Outside, the sun had fully risen. A new family had been formed, and the Romano dynasty would no longer be ruled by power alone, but by love and by choice.